Ethan had always thought his relationship with Maya was unshakable. They had weathered so much together over the years, the ups and downs, the hard times and the triumphs. She was the love of his life, the one person he had never doubted. That's why, when the first suspicions started creeping into his mind, he immediately dismissed them. Maya wouldn't lie to him. She wouldn't cheat. She wasn't capable of it. But doubts, once they take root, are hard to shake. It had started with little things, Maya coming home late from work more frequently, an occasional text she wouldn't explain, or a laugh at her phone that wasn't meant for him. When he'd ask her who it was, she'd wave him off, saying it was just one of her girlfriends. Ethan trusted her. He wanted to believe it. But tonight, something felt different. Maya had gone out with friends, or at least that's what she had told him. She had kissed him goodbye, telling him not to wait up, and slipped out into the evening. Ethan had spent most of the night trying to distract himself, but the gnawing feeling in his stomach wouldn't let him relax. At around midnight, his phone buzzed. It was a message from her. Maya, staying out a little longer, babe. Don't wait up. Love you. He stared at the text, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. She never stayed out this late without checking in. But there was something else. The tone of the message felt off. Her words were casual, but the way she phrased it seemed distant, almost cold. Something about it didn't sit right. Unable to shake the discomfort, Ethan decided to check in with one of her friends, just to be sure. He sent a quick message to Lily, one of Maya's closest friends. Ethan, hey Lily, just checking in. How's the girls' night going? A few minutes later his phone buzzed. Lily, what girls' night? I'm home with Jake watching a movie. Maya didn't mention any plans tonight. Ethan's heart froze. Lily had no reason to lie. A creeping sense of dread flooded his mind as he sat there, staring at the screen. He didn't know what to think. Where could Maya be? And why would she lie? He could feel the walls closing in on him, his heart racing in his chest. What should he do? Should he call her? Should he wait? His hands were shaking as he considered all the possibilities. And then, without thinking too much, he grabbed his jacket, keys, and headed out into the night. The rain had started falling, a light drizzle that slicked the streets. Ethan's mind was spinning as he drove, unsure where he was even going. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just sit there waiting. The possibility that Maya was somewhere she shouldn't be, with someone else, gnawed at him until he couldn't stay still. He drove by the bar where Maya and her friends usually met up, but there was no sign of her. No familiar car in the parking lot, no recognizable faces inside. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. Was she really with someone else? And if so, who? After what felt like hours of driving aimlessly, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a notification from the GPS tracking app they had both installed on their phones years ago, mostly as a safety measure. He hadn't thought about it in forever. The location pinged from across town, in a part of the city Ethan didn't recognize, an upscale neighborhood, far from any place they usually went. He stared at the location for a long moment, a cold weight settling in his chest. He had to know. As he followed the GPS, Ethan's mind raced with 1,000 scenarios. Maybe she was just visiting a friend. Maybe there was some explanation he hadn't considered. He told himself over and over again that there had to be a reasonable answer. But deep down, he knew he was just clinging to hope. He pulled into the neighborhood, scanning the street for her car. His breath caught when he saw it, a familiar silver sedan parked in front of a sleek modern house. The lights inside were on, and through the large windows he could see shadows moving inside. Ethan sat there, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was screaming at him to leave, to turn around and pretend he never saw any of this, but he couldn't. He needed to know the truth. With shaking hands, he stepped out of the car and approached the house. The closer he got, the more his heart pounded in his chest. The front door was slightly ajar, just enough for him to hear faint voices from inside. One of them was unmistakably Maya's. She was laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with him in months. Ethan's stomach churned as he took a deep breath and stepped closer, peering through the crack in the door. And there she was, sitting on the couch with a man he had never seen before. They were close, too close, their bodies angled toward each other in an intimacy that Ethan could feel like a knife to the heart. Maya's hand was resting on the man's arm. Her face lit up in a way Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. It was like she was someone else, someone he didn't know anymore. He stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to process what he was seeing. The room was filled with the sound of their quiet conversation, their soft laughter, and it felt like the walls were closing in on him. Maya leaned in closer to the man, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something Ethan couldn't hear. The man smiled, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her even closer. Ethan's heart shattered. This was it. This was the moment he had always feared, the moment he had never imagined would actually come. She was cheating on him. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, was here, with someone else, living a lie. He stepped back, his body trembling as he turned and walked away, the rain soaking him as he made his way back to the car. He didn't know what to do, what to say, how to feel. All he knew was that his world had just come crashing down around him, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. Ethan sat in his car, staring blankly at the windshield as the rain drummed against it. The drops blurred his vision, but his mind was far away. The image of Maya, laughing, leaning in close to another man, played on a loop in his head. He felt numb, like he was drifting in a fog, unable to process the reality of what had just happened. Minutes passed, maybe even hours. He wasn't sure. The street outside was quiet, save for the occasional sound of a car passing in the distance. He could feel the wet fabric of his jacket clinging to his skin, the cold seeping in, but he didn't care. His mind was consumed with one question: why? Maya and Ethan had never been perfect, but who was? They had their arguments, sure, but Ethan had always believed their love was strong enough to withstand anything. They had built a life together, shared dreams, talked about their future. Now, all of that felt like a cruel joke. With a deep breath, Ethan grabbed his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Should he call her? Confront her? Part of him wanted to scream, demand answers, but another part of him wanted to just disappear, let her have her secrets, and walk away without looking back. Before he could decide, the front door of the house opened. Ethan instinctively ducked in his seat, watching through the rain-spattered windshield as Maya and the man stepped out, arm in arm. They were talking softly, their heads close together, oblivious to the world around them. Maya's laughter floated through the air, light and carefree. It twisted the knife in Ethan's chest even deeper. The man leaned down, brushing a kiss against Maya's cheek before slipping into a sleek black car parked behind hers. Maya watched him drive off, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Then, with a sigh, she turned and headed back toward her car. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. He had to make a choice, confront her or stay hidden in the shadows, letting her leave without ever knowing he had been there. But before he could decide, his phone buzzed again, startling him. He fumbled for it, glancing down at the screen. It was a message from Maya. Maya, hey babe, just leaving now. Can't wait to see you. Sorry it's late. He stared at the message, disbelief washing over him. Sorry it's late. After what he'd just seen, the sheer audacity of her lie was almost unbearable. She was going to walk through their front door, kiss him goodnight, and pretend like nothing had happened. Pretend that she hadn't just spent the evening in another man's arms. A wave of anger surged through Ethan. He clenched his phone, fingers trembling. For the first time that night, clarity cut through the fog of his emotions. He had to confront her. He couldn't let this continue. Maya got into her car and pulled away from the house, driving off into the night. Ethan waited a few seconds before starting his own engine, following her at a distance. He knew the way home. They lived only 15 minutes away. The rain continued to pour, the windshield wipers beating rhythmically as he followed her, his mind racing with the words he'd say when he finally confronted her. When they reached home, Maya pulled into the driveway. Ethan waited a moment, watching her casually step out of the car, as if nothing in the world were wrong. She fumbled with her keys, humming a soft tune as she unlocked the front door. Ethan parked a few houses down. His heart was pounding as he got out of the car, his feet splashing through puddles as he made his way to the house. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he couldn't let this life fester any longer. Maya was in the kitchen when he walked through the door. She smiled when she saw him, her face lighting up the way it always did, as though she were genuinely happy to see him. It made him sick. "Hey, you're still awake," she said, walking over to kiss him on the cheek. "Sorry it took so long." The girls got a little carried away. She flashed him that same warm smile, the one that had always melted his heart. But not tonight. "Maya." Ethan's voice was tight, barely holding back the storm brewing inside him. "Where were you?" Maya blinked, her smile faltering for the briefest of moments before she regained her composure. "What do you mean? I told you, I was out with Lily and the girls." Ethan's stomach twisted as he remembered Lily's message from earlier. His anger flared, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "I talked to Lily," he said slowly, watching her reaction. "She said there wasn't any girls' night. She was at home, with Jake." Maya froze, her hand still resting on his arm. For a split second her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face before she quickly composed herself. She let out a soft laugh, but it was hollow, forced. "Oh, well, maybe she forgot. We met up later after she left Jake. It was last minute." Ethan shook his head. He had given her a chance to come clean, but she had chosen to lie again. It was like a slap to the face. "Stop lying, Maya." His voice rose, the pain and frustration bubbling to the surface. "I followed you tonight. I saw you. I saw you with him." Maya's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Ethan took a step back, his eyes locking onto hers. "I trusted you. I've always trusted you. And now I don't even know who you are." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, don't," he cut her off, his voice raw with emotion. "Don't tell me you're sorry. Don't try to explain it away. I saw everything." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Maya's tears spilled down her cheeks, her lip trembling as she struggled to find the words. But Ethan didn't want to hear them. He didn't want excuses or apologies. The betrayal was too deep. Finally, Maya took a deep breath. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "It was a mistake. I love you, Ethan, I swear I do. But Ethan held up his hand, silencing her. "You don't get to say that. Not anymore." He turned away, his heart breaking with every step as he walked toward the door. The life they had built, the future they had planned, crumbled beneath his feet like ashes in the wind. As he reached the door, he paused, taking one last look at the woman he thought he knew. "I'll be gone by morning," he said quietly, before stepping out into the night, leaving behind the life that was no longer his. Ethan stood outside their home in the rain, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like an anvil. The world felt surreal, like he had just stepped out of a nightmare and was waiting to wake up. But this was real, too real. Every drop of rain that hit his face was a reminder of the life he had just walked away from. He didn't go back to the car. He couldn't. Instead, he walked down the street, his mind spinning in 1,000 directions, replaying every moment he had spent with Maya over the years. How long had she been lying to him? How many nights had she smiled at him while secretly living this other life? His feet moved on their own, and before long, he found himself at the small park where they had shared their first kiss, now a dark and empty space, just like the void inside him. His phone buzzed. He ignored it at first, but the vibrations persisted. Finally, with a sigh, he pulled it out of his pocket. It was Maya calling him. She had texted a dozen times since he walked out, but he hadn't read any of them. Now, her name flashed on the screen, a cruel reminder of the betrayal he'd just uncovered. Ethan stared at the phone, his thumb hovering over the decline button. Part of him wanted to hear her voice, even if it was filled with lies, but another part of him, stronger this time, knew he couldn't keep listening. He had to let go. He had to move on, even if it tore him apart. So he let the call go to voicemail, then turned the phone off altogether. The night was quiet, the rain easing to a drizzle as he sat on one of the park benches. He leaned back, staring up at the sky, watching the clouds drift slowly across the moon. Time seemed to stand still, and for the first time that night he allowed himself to breathe, really breathe, taking in the cold, damp air. What now? The question hung over him like a storm cloud. He couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened, but he also couldn't imagine a future without Maya. She had been his everything for so long. The very thought of living without her felt impossible. Yet the betrayal was too deep, too raw. He couldn't unsee what he had seen. He couldn't undo the trust that had been shattered. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Ethan tensed, thinking for a moment that Maya had followed him. But when he looked up, it wasn't her. It was someone else, someone familiar. "Ethan?" He blinked, the voice pulling him from his daze. Standing in front of him, with an umbrella over her head, was Chloe. She was one of their mutual friends, though they hadn't spoken much outside of group gatherings. She was looking at him with concern, her brow furrowed as she approached the bench. "What are you doing out here?" she asked softly, sitting down beside him, her umbrella now shielding both of them from the light rain. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. I don't know. Just needed to clear my head, I guess." Chloe didn't say anything at first, just sat there quietly beside him, the soft patter of rain filling the silence. She had always been good at reading people, knowing when to push and when to just be present. Tonight it seemed she was opting for the latter. After a long pause, Ethan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maya's cheating on me." Chloe's eyes widened in shock, her mouth falling open. "What? No, that can't be true." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Ethan said, his voice firmer now. "I saw her. I saw them. She's been lying to me for, I don't even know how long." Chloe was silent for a moment, processing the weight of his words. Then, without hesitation, she reached out and took his hand in hers, a comforting gesture that Ethan hadn't expected but appreciated all the same. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," he muttered bitterly. "That's the worst part. I didn't see it coming. I thought we were solid, you know. I thought we were. I thought she loved me." Chloe squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe she does love you, in her own way. But that doesn't make what she did okay. It doesn't excuse the lies." Ethan nodded, though it didn't make him feel any better. "I don't know what to do, Chloe. I don't know how to move forward from this." She looked at him, her gaze soft but firm. "You move forward by taking it one day at a time. You don't have to figure everything out tonight or even tomorrow. You just have to focus on getting through this moment, and then the next, and eventually you'll know what to do." Ethan sighed, leaning back against the bench. Chloe's words made sense, but they didn't take away the pain. Nothing could do that. Not yet, anyway. "Why are you out here anyway?" he asked after a moment, realizing how odd it was to run into her at this hour. Chloe smiled faintly. "I was just walking home from a late shift at the hospital. I like the quiet after work, helps me unwind. I didn't expect to see anyone, especially not you." Ethan nodded, grateful for the coincidence. "Thanks for sitting with me. I don't know if I could have handled being alone right now." "You're not alone," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "You have people who care about you, Ethan. Don't forget that." They sat there in silence for a while longer, the rain now just a mist in the air. Slowly, the weight in Ethan's chest began to lift, just a little. He wasn't okay. He wasn't sure when he would be, but for the first time since discovering the truth, he didn't feel completely lost. Eventually, Chloe stood up, offering him her umbrella. "You need this more than I do," she said with a small smile. Ethan shook his head. "I'll be all right. Besides, I think I need the rain tonight." Chloe hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but if you need anything at all, call me, okay?" He nodded, watching her walk away down the dimly lit street. Once she was out of sight, Ethan stood up and began the long walk home. The rain washed over him, cold and cleansing, as he moved through the empty streets. When he reached the house, he stood outside for a moment, staring at the familiar front door. It no longer felt like home, not after tonight. Still, he needed to go inside, if only to pack his things and leave. The house was dark and quiet when he stepped through the door. Maya was nowhere to be seen, probably asleep upstairs, waiting for him to return so she could try and salvage whatever was left of their relationship. But Ethan knew better. There was nothing left to save. He walked up the stairs, his footsteps heavy as he entered the bedroom. Maya was lying on her side of the bed, her face buried in the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing around them. Ethan stood there for a long moment, just watching her. Then, without a word, he turned and grabbed a suitcase from the closet. He packed quickly, methodically, taking only what he needed. When he was done, he glanced at Maya one last time. "I hope it was worth it," he whispered before turning and walking out the door, leaving her and their life behind. The door clicked softly behind him as Ethan stepped out of the house for what felt like the final time. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but there was no turning back. With his suitcase in hand, he headed toward his car, the faint sound of the rain accompanying his every step. The house, once filled with warmth and shared memories, now felt like a tomb of broken promises and lies. Ethan knew that whatever had once existed between him and Maya was gone, irreparably shattered by her betrayal. He didn't feel angry anymore, just empty. He tossed his suitcase in the trunk and climbed into the driver's seat, resting his hands on the steering wheel without turning on the engine. For a long moment, he sat there, unsure of where to go. His mind was spinning with the events of the night, the confrontation, Maya's tearful apology, the lies upon lies that had finally unraveled. He pulled out his phone again, switching it on. There were still several unread messages from Maya. Some were long apologies, others were desperate pleas to talk, to come back, to give her a chance to explain. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to read them. He knew what she would say. It was a mistake, she'd claim. It didn't mean anything. But it had meant everything to him, and that was the real difference. Just as he was about to put the phone down, a text came in from Chloe. "Chloe, are you okay?" Ethan stared at the message. It was simple, but it held so much more meaning. He wasn't okay, and he didn't know when or if he ever would be. But her concern was a lifeline, a small reminder that not everything in his world had fallen apart. After a moment, he replied, "Ethan, I don't know. I left. I'm sitting in the car, not sure what to do." Her response came quickly. "Chloe, want to talk or just need company?" Ethan hesitated. The idea of talking more about what had happened was exhausting, but at the same time, the thought of being alone right now felt unbearable. "Ethan, company, I guess. I just don't want to be by myself." Chloe's reply was immediate. "Chloe, come over. I'll make tea." He felt a small wave of relief wash over him. Tea. Something simple, something warm, something that reminded him of the comforts of life before everything had gone wrong. He typed out a quick response. "Ethan, on my way." The drive to Chloe's apartment was short, but it gave Ethan just enough time to gather his thoughts. He couldn't stay in the past, replaying the night over and over again. He needed to keep moving, to start figuring out what his life would look like without Maya. But every thought was a jumble of emotions, and he still wasn't sure where to start. Chloe lived in a modest apartment on the other side of town, far enough away from the house that it felt like an escape, a necessary distance. When he arrived, she was already waiting at the door, her hair damp from the rain and her expression soft with concern. She smiled faintly as he walked up, but it wasn't a smile of pity. It was one of understanding, something Ethan hadn't realized he needed until that moment. "Hey," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on, I've got the kettle boiling." Ethan followed her inside, feeling the warmth of the apartment wrap around him like a blanket. It was cozy, filled with personal touches that made it feel lived in. Photos on the walls, a stack of books on the coffee table, a faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. As Chloe busied herself in the kitchen, Ethan sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. A few minutes later, she joined him, handing him a mug of steaming tea. He took it, grateful for the warmth in his hands. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Chloe said gently as she sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "Just know I'm here." Ethan nodded, sipping the tea in silence. For a while they just sat there, the sound of the rain outside providing a soft background noise to the quiet room. It was a strange kind of comfort, sitting there with Chloe, knowing she wasn't pushing him for explanations, wasn't judging him, just being there. "I don't even know how to feel," Ethan finally said, breaking the silence. "It's like, one minute I'm angry, the next I just feel nothing." Chloe set her mug down and turned to face him. "It's normal to feel that way, Ethan. What happened? It's a huge betrayal. It's going to take time to process." He nodded, but processing felt like an impossible task. "I just keep asking myself if there were signs, if there was something I missed. I keep thinking, maybe if I had been different, if I had been more present or—" Chloe reached over and placed a hand on his arm, stopping him mid-sentence. "This isn't your fault. Don't do that to yourself. Whatever happened between Maya and that other guy, that's on her, not you. You can't take the blame for her choices." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He didn't want to cry. He hadn't cried in years, and he didn't want to start now. Still, Chloe's words cut through some of the self-doubt that had been swirling in his mind. "I thought I knew her," he said quietly. "I thought we were solid." Chloe's expression softened. "People change, Ethan. Sometimes in ways we can't predict or understand. But that doesn't mean you weren't enough. You were. You still are." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt safe. Ethan wasn't ready to face the world yet, but in this moment, sitting beside Chloe, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could start to put the pieces of his life back together. It would take time, and it would hurt, but he wasn't alone in it. Not tonight, anyway. As the rain continued to fall outside, Chloe shifted on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "You know," she began hesitantly, "I don't know what the future holds for you or Maya, but whatever happens, you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. He wasn't used to people believing in him like that, not when he didn't even believe in himself right now. But Chloe's words planted a small seed of hope, one that he desperately needed. "Thanks," he said softly. "I'm not sure I believe it yet, but thank you." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You don't have to believe it right now. I'll believe it for you until you're ready." Ethan looked down at his tea, feeling a small flicker of warmth spread through his chest, not from the drink, but from the comfort of her words. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going, enough to make him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely lost after all. They sat there for hours, talking occasionally, but mostly just sitting in the silence, letting the weight of the night slowly fade into the background. For the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to simply be. No expectations, no pressure, no rush to figure everything out. And as the rain finally stopped, and the first hint of dawn began to creep through the windows, Ethan realized that, despite everything, he was going to be okay. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Chloe's apartment, casting a soft glow across the room. Ethan hadn't slept, but he didn't feel exhausted anymore. Something about the quiet of the night, the weight of the rain outside, and Chloe's steady presence had calmed him, offering a fragile sense of peace that felt almost foreign after the storm that had raged within him all night. Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch next to him, her head resting on the armrest. She looked peaceful, her breathing steady and calm. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had stayed up with him for hours, listening, comforting, and never once making him feel like a burden. He didn't deserve that kind of kindness, not after how shattered and broken he felt inside. He quietly stood up, careful not to disturb her, and walked to the window. The streets outside were quiet, still slick from the rain, with only a few early risers walking their dogs or jogging. The world was moving on, even if he wasn't ready to. The familiar weight of uncertainty settled back in his chest as he stared out at the city, his thoughts drifting back to Maya. He hadn't heard from her since he'd left her asleep in their bedroom, but the unread messages on his phone were still there, waiting like ghosts he couldn't ignore. Ethan knew he'd have to face her eventually, but every time he thought about it, his stomach turned. What could she possibly say that would make this right? How could he ever trust her again? A quiet rustling from the couch pulled him from his thoughts. Chloe stirred, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. She blinked in the early morning light and then looked over at Ethan, offering him a sleepy but warm smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft and a little groggy. "Morning," Ethan replied, trying to muster a small smile in return. Chloe stood up and stretched, then walked over to him by the window. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't think I could have, even if I tried." She nodded, understanding. "That's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out yet." They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the city wake up around them. Chloe's apartment had a quiet serenity to it, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed Ethan's mind. It made him feel safe, though he knew that the real world was waiting for him outside, along with all the problems he had tried to escape. "I should probably go," Ethan said after a long pause. "I need to figure out, well, everything." Chloe turned to face him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Do you know where you're going? You don't have to rush, Ethan. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." The offer was tempting, but Ethan knew he couldn't hide forever. "Thanks, but I think I need some space. I don't know where I'm going, but I need to clear my head." She didn't push him. Instead, she nodded, understanding that this was something he had to do on his own. "If you ever need a place to crash, you know where to find me. And if you want to talk, or not talk, I'm here." Ethan smiled faintly. "You've already done so much, Chloe. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said simply. "That's what friends are for." The word friends hung in the air between them. It felt right, but at the same time, there was something unspoken lingering beneath the surface, something neither of them seemed ready to address. Not now, anyway. Ethan grabbed his jacket and slung it over his shoulder, giving Chloe one last look before heading toward the door. "Take care of yourself, all right?" she said softly. "I will," he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. As he stepped out into the crisp morning air, a strange feeling settled over him, like he was on the edge of something new, something unknown. His world had crumbled, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild it. Not today, and not tomorrow, but someday. He drove aimlessly for a while, not really knowing where he was going. The roads were quiet, the city still waking up, and Ethan let himself drift. For the first time in hours, he checked his phone. Maya hadn't sent any more messages, but the old ones were still there, waiting. He stared at them for a moment, then with a heavy sigh, he opened the first one. "Maya." "Ethan, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Ethan scrolled to the next. "Maya, I don't even know where to start. It was a mistake, okay? A stupid, stupid mistake. Please, can we talk? You don't have to forgive me, but I need you to understand." His thumb hovered over the screen, but the words blurred together. Every message was the same. Apologies, please, excuses. He didn't know what he had expected, but this wasn't it. He put the phone down without replying and kept driving. Eventually, he found himself at the outskirts of the city, where the streets gave way to fields and open spaces. There was a small motel off the highway, the kind of place where people stopped when they needed to be nowhere in particular. It felt right. Ethan pulled into the parking lot, checked in, and took the key to his room. The room was simple, a bed, a small TV, a window with a view of the highway. But it was enough. For now, it was all he needed. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his suitcase, unsure of what the next step would be. The truth was, he had no plan, no roadmap for how to move forward. But maybe that was okay. Maybe for the first time in a long time, he didn't need to have all the answers. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Maya, it was Chloe. "Chloe, hey, just checking in. You doing okay?" Ethan smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth at her concern. "Ethan, I'm okay. Checked into a motel for now, just trying to figure things out." Her reply came quickly. "Chloe, good. Take your time. I'm here if you need me." Ethan put the phone down, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the fact that, despite everything, there were still people who cared about him. People who weren't wrapped up in lies and betrayal. People who were genuine. As he lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, Ethan realized that the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But for the first time, he felt like he had a choice in how to move forward, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Days passed in a blur. Ethan moved from one motel to another, always trying to outrun the heaviness inside him. He avoided talking to anyone about what had happened. The pain of Maya's betrayal still clung to him like a second skin, and he wasn't ready to confront it head on. The thought of going back home felt impossible, so he drifted, floating through a life that now seemed completely unfamiliar. Chloe checked in with him daily, offering her quiet support, but she never pushed him to return or talk about his feelings. That, at least, was a small comfort. However, Ethan knew deep down that he couldn't stay in limbo forever. The pain of the breakup and the betrayal was like a constant hum in his mind, but something else had started to creep in. A question he hadn't been able to shake. Was it only Maya? Or was there something else I missed? Ethan had known Maya for years, trusted her, loved her, but now every moment of their relationship felt tainted. How long had she been lying? Was the man she had cheated with the first, or had there been others? The more he thought about it, the more doubts began to plague him. What had once been a single devastating revelation now felt like the tip of an iceberg he wasn't sure he could handle uncovering. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself scrolling through old photos and messages on his phone. He knew it was self-destructive, but he couldn't help himself. He came across an old picture of them at a party a year ago, Maya laughing, a drink in her hand, her arm around his waist. They both looked so happy, so unaware of what was to come. As Ethan stared at the photo, something clicked in his mind. A memory. That night, Maya had disappeared for a while at the party. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now it felt suspicious. Ethan had been drunk, and Maya had said she was going to grab something from the car, but she'd been gone for longer than expected, and when she returned, she seemed flustered. He hadn't pressed her about it then, but now, the memory gnawed at him. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away, but it was like a splinter lodged in his mind. He needed to know. He couldn't stop himself from wondering. The next morning, Ethan did something he had avoided doing since the night he left. He logged into their shared bank account. He scrolled through months of transactions. Everything seemed normal until he saw a hotel charge that stood out. It was from a few months ago, at a time when Maya had supposedly been visiting her family out of town. A hotel? His pulse quickened as he stared at the transaction. Maya had never mentioned staying at a hotel. When she came back from the trip, she had casually talked about spending time with her family and old friends. There was no mention of staying anywhere other than her parents' house. But here was the proof, glaring back at him from his screen. Ethan's mind raced. Could it have been innocent? Maybe she had needed a place to stay for one night. But then why hadn't she told him? Why hide something like that? He felt sick to his stomach as his mind conjured up images of what could have happened in that hotel room. He needed answers. Without thinking, Ethan pulled up his messages and texted Maya for the first time since he'd left. Ethan, we need to talk. It took her a few minutes to respond. Maya, Ethan, I've been waiting for you to reach out. Please, can we talk face to face? Ethan clenched his jaw. The thought of seeing her again made his chest tighten, but he needed to know the truth. Ethan, fine, I'll come by the house later. He spent the rest of the day in a haze trying to prepare himself for the conversation. When evening came, he found himself driving back to the house he used to call home. It felt strange pulling into the driveway, like he didn't belong there anymore. Maya was waiting for him in the living room when he walked in. She looked pale, her eyes red from crying. Ethan, she started, but he held up a hand. We're not doing that, he said, his voice cold. I'm not here for apologies. I need answers. Maya blinked, taken aback by his tone. I don't understand. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. That hotel charge, from a few months ago, When you said you were visiting your family, what was that? Maya's face paled even more, and Ethan immediately knew something was wrong. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. Maya, Ethan pressed, his voice harder now. What was that hotel? She swallowed, her hands trembling. Ethan, please, it's not what you think. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was. Just tell me the truth, Ethan snapped, his frustration boiling over. I deserve that much. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but Ethan didn't feel sympathy. He needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I met someone, she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It was a mistake, but it wasn't just that one time. I thought it was over, but I saw him again at that party you're thinking of. And then again when I went out of town. I don't know how it got so far, but Ethan's heart sank, a coldness spreading through him. He had suspected, but hearing her admit it was worse than he had imagined. The party, the trip, all those times he hadn't questioned her. They were all lies. And it wasn't just one betrayal, it was a pattern, a secret life she had been living behind his back. He stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. How many, Maya? How many times? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, Ethan. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you. Never meant to hurt me? Ethan's voice was incredulous. Do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me for who knows how long. And I believed you. I trusted you. Maya collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs, but Ethan couldn't stand to be in the same room anymore. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear his mind. His world had just shattered all over again, but this time the pieces were too sharp, too jagged to even think about picking up. As he drove away, his phone buzzed with a message. He ignored it at first, but then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the name. Chloe. He pulled over to the side of the road and checked the message. Chloe, Ethan, I need to tell you something. Can we talk? Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The last thing he needed right now was another confession, another secret to unravel. But something in Chloe's tone made him uneasy. He stared at the message for a long moment before finally responding. Ethan, what's going on? Her reply came quickly. Chloe, it's about Maya and me. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and me. Before he could even process what that meant, another message came through. Chloe, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way. But I think you deserve to know everything. Ethan's hands trembled as he read Chloe's message. The meaning of those words, Maya and me, hung in the air, pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake off. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it. Chloe, his best friend, the one who had been his anchor through all this. What the hell was going on? He sat there in his car, parked on the side of an empty road, the glow of the streetlight casting eerie shadows over the dashboard. For a moment, all he could hear was his heartbeat, loud and fast, and the distant hum of passing cars. The night, which had already been so heavy with betrayal, suddenly felt suffocating. With a deep breath, he typed a reply. Ethan, what do you mean? Tell me everything. Now. His thumb hovered over the send button for a split second longer than necessary. As soon as he hit send, a pit opened up in his stomach. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever truth Chloe was about to drop on him. But he also knew he couldn't live with more lies. Not now. Not after everything with Maya. It didn't take long for Chloe's reply to come through, and Ethan's chest tightened as he opened the message. Chloe, I don't know how to say this, Ethan. I hate myself for it. I've hated myself for it for months now. But Maya, she came to me before all this, when things between you two started getting rocky. I should have stopped it. I should have been a better friend to you. He stared at the message, uncomprehending. The words were there, but they didn't make sense. She came to me? His mind refused to connect the dots. But then the rest of her message came in a series of texts, and suddenly everything started to fall apart, one shattered piece at a time. Chloe, she and I, it wasn't just her with another guy. I was part of it too. It started one night when she was feeling lonely, and I was, oh no, weak. It was only supposed to be one time, but it wasn't. I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan. God, I hate that it ever happened. I thought she was just confused, that she didn't know what she wanted, but I didn't stop her. Chloe, I'm so sorry. I've been keeping this from you for so long, and it's been eating me alive. The pit in Ethan's stomach expanded, consuming him from the inside out. Chloe, and Maya? He read and reread her texts, but no matter how many times his eyes passed over the words, they didn't become any less painful, any less devastating. Everything felt wrong. Chloe, the one who had been his safe harbor during the worst of this storm, had been part of the betrayal too? He felt like the ground beneath him had been ripped away, leaving him in free fall, with nothing to grab onto. He thought back to all those moments with Chloe, the nights they spent talking, her comforting words, her concern, her promise that she would be there for him no matter what. All of it felt like a lie now, another twisted thread in the web of deceit Maya had spun around him. How long had Chloe been lying to his face? How long had she pretended to be the friend he needed while secretly carrying on with his girlfriend? The world around him blurred as he stared blankly at his phone. His heart pounded in his chest, his breathing shallow and uneven. The truth, the full scope of what had happened, was too much to take in all at once. Without thinking, Ethan called Chloe. His mind was a mess of anger, hurt, confusion, and he needed to hear it from her, needed to hear her voice crack under the weight of what she had done. The phone rang twice before Chloe picked up, her voice soft, shaky. Ethan, she started, but he cut her off, his voice hard. How could you do this to me, Chloe? His words were sharp, raw with emotion. How could you sit there night after night pretending to be my friend, listening to me pour my heart out while you were part of it the whole time? You, his voice broke. You were supposed to be the one person I could trust. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He could hear Chloe's quiet breaths, could almost imagine her sitting there, wringing her hands, trying to find the right words to say. But there were no right words for this. Nothing she could say would undo the damage she had done. I know, Chloe finally whispered. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Ethan, please, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Ethan laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. That's what everyone says, right? You didn't mean to hurt me. You didn't want this to happen. But it did, Chloe. You let it happen. You and Maya both. Chloe's voice cracked when she spoke again. I was weak, Ethan. I was confused. I didn't know how to stop it. I should have told you the truth, but I was afraid of losing you. Well, congratulations, Ethan said coldly. You've lost me anyway. Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan didn't know what else to say. There was nothing left, no trust, no friendship, nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me, Chloe said quietly after a long pause. I wanted you to know. I couldn't keep lying to you, not anymore. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He had trusted Chloe with everything, with his deepest fears, his insecurities, his heartbreak over Maya, and she had been betraying him all along. I can't do this, he said, his voice shaking. I can't talk to you right now. Ethan, please. He hung up before she could finish, his hands shaking as he tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He sat there for a long time, staring out into the darkness, his mind reeling from the weight of it all. Chloe, Maya, the people he had trusted most in the world had betrayed him, had ripped apart the life he thought he knew. It felt like his heart had been shattered all over again, the pieces ground into dust. He had lost Maya, but somehow, losing Chloe felt even worse. She had been his rock, the person he had leaned on when everything else was falling apart. And now she was part of the destruction too. Ethan leaned forward, resting his head on the steering wheel, and let out a shaky breath. The pain was too much. It felt endless, like it would swallow him whole. How had his life spiraled so far out of control? How had he ended up here, alone, betrayed by the people he loved most? There were no answers, only the hollow ache of betrayal and the heavy silence that followed. He had no idea where to go from here.